Dragon Age Tevinter Nights. Down Among the Dead Men by Sylvia Fekete. He had done everything he could to avoid being drafted into the funeral guard. Swapping duties, extra shifts, tasteful bribes. Nothing had worked. Aldrich's friends in the City Watch had assumed it was the tedium he hated, and Aldrich, embarrassed, let them. Now, spear straight, he listened to the old priest's surprisingly hale voice boom off the stonework with prayers for a dead man. And the Maker, clad in the majesty of the sky, set foot to earth, and at his touch all warring ceased. Aldrich hadn't known the dead nobleman, but Penric Khan's funeral was well attended. A few mourners appeared genuinely heartbroken. Aldrich kept his gaze away from their red eyes and grief-twisted faces, maintaining a respectful, bland stare into the middle distance. From every corner of the earth the chant of light echoed, and the Maker walked the land. Aldrich's eyes wandered to the majesty of the copper-tiled vaults. This temple complex had been built to celebrate the retaken of Navarra lands, 365 towers, helmed by King Caspar II, long may he rest. That it was a marvel among a city of marvels didn't diminish the glittering craftsmanship. What did sour it was the dead man on the bier behind him. Aldrich squirmed at the thought of the hollow pits that were his eyes. Curiosity, his father had said in their clay-walled home on the outskirts of the city. That was Aldrich's trouble. Curiosity and too much schooling for a boy that wakes up crying from nightmares, my lad. By the Maker's will, I decree harmony in all things. Aldrich had grown out of those nightscapes as he entered the tedium of a guardsman. He missed them in an odd sort of way. Their crooked sceneries, their strange terrors that felt tailored only to him. The vaults here had faint echoes of that majesty, blurred greatly by memory and time. Lost in a gloomy churn of thoughts, Aldrich didn't hear the whisper of silk on the bier as the priest thundered the end of the chant. He missed the crowd's faces turning quizzical, then horrified. Let balance be restored, and the world given eternal life. But Aldrich would always remember the moment a withered hand grasped him by the shoulder, and a corpse in jangling gold crunch its teeth into his neck. What happened then? The older man tilted a pot of tea encouragingly towards Aldrich. The younger mage, a woman with pulled-back hair and a severe gaze, sipped her own tea and regarded the guardsman silently. Aldrich shook his head. He didn't feel like tea particularly, while his eyes soaked in the room. He'd never been in a necromancer's study before. Ornately decorated skulls hung from hooks in the high, dark ceiling. One wall was made up of shelves with books and tiny labelled drawers. The other was fronted by tables full of bubbling flasks, scales, alembics, and tortured-looking glass. A smartly attired servant ground away with a pedestal and mortar. Despite himself, Aldrich's eye kept settling there. Please don't mind Manfred. The older mage refilled his own cup. He'll finish mixing that tincture before you know it. Manfred, a clean-boned skeleton, held up a bowl. Aldrich read something helpful in the cant of its skull. The young mage looked critical. "It needs half a cup more elfroot." The corpse pulled out one of the drawers on the far side of the room, took out a withered root, and shook it inquiringly. "The royal elfroot, please." Manfred moaned and fumbled at more drawers. Every mage in the kingdom of Navarra was part of the Mortalitazi, a group that trained the gifted in the mysteries of magic. They served as Navarra's arcane protectors and priests. Within the Mortalitazi was a group of selected mages invited into an old fraternity called the Morn Watch. The Watchers served as elite guardians, keepers of the Grand Necropolis, and its sacred repository of the dead. "Yes, that's the one," the older mage beamed. "Very good indeed, Manfred." This was the first time Aldrich had met a Watcher. They had been the picture of courtesy, but Aldrich thought it would be futile to explain to them what the sight of a skeleton ambling under its own power did to a simple guardsman. "Now, where were we?" Aldrich dragged his gaze back to the older Watcher across from him. With his silvered hair, tidy moustache, and long face full of concern, his expression reminded Aldrich of the Chantry scholars when they caught him reading by candlelight in the library. The good brothers and sisters had kindly tried to dissuade Aldrich from living in pages for so long he couldn't think straight come the morning. It never worked. "Is there anything else you can recall about Lord Khan's funeral?" the mage asked gently. "No, I think not much, sir. Another guard, Delilah even had to peel him off me, sir." The necromancer waved a hand. "Emmerich will do, please." Aldrich nodded absently, touching the bandage on his neck. Sorry. It's a blur of screams, sir. Some of it your own, I bet," the necromancer joked, but looked so sympathetic, Aldrich relaxed by a degree. "Yes, sir." He had screamed, fallen to the floor as the snapping, well-dressed corpse dug into his shoulders. He'd screamed as Delilah tried to pry it off and smack into the altar for her trouble. He'd screamed as he braced a boot against the corpse's ribcage and kicked it over and over. "The Morn Watch can see to this, Guardsman Aldrich," the younger mage commented. "This is Ballywick. You are fully committed to this venture?" Aldrich tried to recall how she had been introduced. He'd been trying to stay as far as possible from Manfred at the time. "The captain, they wanted a city guard to be involved, madame," Aldrich said. What the captain had actually said was, "That bloody ceremonial duty is supposed to be ceremonial, and make sure those musty corpse botherers bury Khan's body before his family blame us somehow for this." And then she had rather unexpectedly patted him sympathetically and gingerly on the shoulder. "If I can ask if that's all right," Aldrich fumbled. He never dealt with necromancers face to face, outside seeing them at funerals. "Do you know what's been going on?" "A premature procession," the younger Watcher said crisply. The older one, Emmerich, nodded. "It must be, but that should be nigh impossible this close to the Grand Necropolis." How come?" Aldrich asked. "Excellent question." Emmerich swirled the tea in his mug, looking too cheerful, Aldrich thought, for a man framed by so many racks of skulls. "The simple explanation is the wards inside the crypts that are most minor, errant spirits. Benric Khan is either a man of great and unfulfilled passions, or very unlucky. The necromancer took a swallow. After the funeral, Khan's corpse was spotted heading towards the necropolis. It would be easier to locate him if we had any remains, but there was very little spare material left after his body was displayed. Aldrich reached into a pocket and brought out a handkerchief. He unrolled its contents onto the polished desk. Will this do? The young watcher raised one thin eyebrow. Mina. That was it. The name was Mina. I've found it. It got it in the fight, madame, with Lord Khan. Woke up with scraping my palm. Mina picked up the curved rib bone. One end was jagged from where Aldrich's boot had connected with Khan's rib cage. She handed it to Emmerich. Excellent. Emmerich, this is your remit. I'll have it ready before sunset, he sighed. It would be faster if we managed to replace the librarian by now. The students have naturally left the books a mess. Mina nodded and swept to the door, robes flaring. Guardsman, come along. What for? A gentle inquiry into the manner of Penric Khan's death. My brother was stabbed to death by Duke Yanis van Markham in the alley. Aldrich was already wilting under Ivan Khan's hawkish gaze. Are you sure, Lady Khan? Utterly. It's only the guard was never told. I don't think the captain knows how he... What of it? The deceased Lord Khan's older sister sniffed, her handsome face wrinkling in disdain. Why should I let the details of my brother's death become the barracks gossip? Janice was a bitter rival of Penric's. They bumped into each other at drinking establishment, overindulged and bickered about who'd slain more dragons on the field. Then they fought, and disgraced both our houses in killing each other on a common public street. But the bodies... I arranged for the footmen to deliver my brother's body to the priests. The Van Markhams did the same for Yanis. Lady Khan scowled. The involvement of the city guard in a matter of private grief seemed most unnecessary. Aldrich rallied. Were there any witnesses to Lord Khan's death? The staff of the tavern, my brother's attendants, Yanis' attendants, and several passer-bys who stopped to watch the sport. Mina's presence had meant Lady Khan couldn't turn them away. The mall watchers had absolute authority over funerary dead, but the noblewoman had practically ground her teeth when inviting them into her parlour. Frilly and gilded, Aldrich couldn't help note, in that Orlesian style that was all the rage in the Free Marches 40 years ago. Lady Khan rose. If this has wound to its end, my household is still in mourning. One last inquiry, Lady Khan, Mina said. Was there a similar disturbance at Duke Yanis's funeral? Was it as restless as Lord Khan's? Lady Khan glared. Duke Yanis was interned in the winged halls of the great necropolis a day before my brother's funeral, without incident or delay. I promise, guardsman, you will be perfectly safe by my side. Aldrich hung back from a set of massive stone gates. They were lit by braziers and flanked by statues of robed and skull-faced men, carved in a style favoured in the exalted age, Aldrich's memory inanely reminded him. Basalt from northern Ferelden, onyx inlays from Cumberland. Note how precise the light falls on the skulls. Well, why? Why would Lord Khan go into the necropolis? Aldrich crossed his arms. hoping they didn't start to shake. "I don't understand. Why not let himself be buried if he wanted inside?" "The Mortalitazi believe that when someone dies, an inhuman spirit is pushed out from the Fade into our world." Minor waved a gloved hand at the panorama of the Grand Necropolis, whose upper levels could be seen past the gates, quarried into the stone. "In exchange, we invite those inhuman spirits to house themselves in the empty bodies left behind, correct?" Aldrich shrugged. It was such common knowledge he didn't see her point. Of course, outside Navarra, most nations burned their dead instead of entombing them. Even Aldrich, with no love of corpses, found the thought disturbing. "Less well known is it that if more vigorous spirits claim a corpse, it may become enmeshed in that man or woman's unfinished business. Whatever Lord Khan's goal, it must be something that would disturb the necropolis, or it could lie within a path forbidden, even to the dead." Aldrich shuddered. Something on a causeway past the gate was coming toward them, and the spirit driving him is a strong one indeed, Minor added. "I'll be no good down there, madam," Aldrich blurted. "Why?" "I'm sorry, I don't do well with the dead, madam." "Why not?" Aldrich shrugged helplessly. "They make me uncomfortable. Ever since I was young, I got nervous around corpses, madam." "Fascinating." Minor looked oddly intrigued. "Then I must apologize for my choice of transportation." A carriage rattled up. Aldrich gripped his spear. The horses were bare skeletons, with coronas of sickly, surging green fire. The pair stamped as they drew up. Aldrich stepped back as a horse swung its bony head around, as if mimicking a living curiosity. "Madame?" Aldrich's voice was strangled. Minor's face was half-shadowed by the bulk of the carriage, rimmed by that spectral light. The appraising look on her face threw Aldrich back to being called to the Chantry's mother's office in trouble, the squirming sensation of being measured in a way all his reading hadn't prepared him for. "This must be your choice." Minor lit into the carriage, skirts brushing the liquor-black frame. "Only answer one question." The inside of the carriage was dark and curtained. Minor's voice issued from the plush shadows. "Would not a guardsman who's recited the history of every stone in every promenade we've passed regret passing up the chance to see the architecture of the Grand Necropolis?" "I didn't know I was talking out loud," Aldrich muttered, clinging to the handhold as the carriage pelted down a track circling the necropolis's opened-air mausoleums. "You mumble." Minor seemed more relaxed. Now they were on their way. "I am impressed by the specificity of your knowledge." The Chantry taught me letters." Ivy-smothered archways whipped by. Then the horses plunged down on a thoroughfare lined with human-sized urns. "I kept some books." "Architectural art seems to be your passion." "Yes, madam." "And you have excellent recall. Given your apparent zeal, I'm surprised you didn't join the Chantry Scholars." Aldrich thought of those old rooms of books with a pang, followed by a darker current, coughing in poorly lit rooms by the river. A year-long fever haunted his parents and cousins. "A god makes enough to feed their family, madam." Minor seemed content to leave things there, and took something out of a velvet purse, a rib bone. Emmerich prepared your trophy for us. His cathix is very reliable. Aldrich felt the ground tilt down slope. Madame? His magic. She tapped the rib bone. This will now guide us to where Lord Khan's fled. Emmerich would join us, but he's been called to other matters. The carriage swung down a tunnel. Aldrich felt his ears pop, a sensation he recognized from swimming in lakes as a child. That can't be right. We only started travelling down. What? Pardon me, madame. What's more urgent than a body loose in the Grand Necropolis? Her cheek quirked. Our chief issue will be sorting him out from the others. They finally careened to a halt. Somehow, in that sunless tunnel was a row of pale willows. Their drooping branches formed a silent bower leading to a cage over a square, dark pit. Have you ever been to the necropolis? Mina asked as she stepped out, unlatching the cage's gate. Aldrich thought about his parents. Twice. We will be going deeper than the public gardens. The necromancer snapped a finger. The cage clattered as if it were being shaken by something deep below. Touch nothing, make little sound, and do not wander. Yes, madame. Aldrich touched the bandage on his neck again, and tried very hard not to look at the stamping skeletal horses. Madame, when we see Lord Khan, yes? Aldrich rubbed his neck, feeling more than a little resentment at the thought of the man. It was as if all the terror from the funeral was slowly transmuting into outrage. He's a mean biter in death, madame. How do we rope his sorry lordship back to us? A platform rose, slamming into place inside the cage, with what sounded to Aldrich like a very final thud. We will ask him, guardsman, politely. The cage had been descending for a minute, its chain shuddering and groaning. Aldrich strained to see the levels they passed through the gloom. Here was the lower parts of the open-air gardens, but they'd gone down below them already, surely. The necropolis geography is a tangle. Aldrich startled. Mina was beside him, closer than he'd realized. She put a steadying hand on his shoulder. Aldrich was further surprised to feel the warmth of it through Mina's glove, even a heartbeat after she removed the hand. It subtends in unexpected ways. I can't take your meaning, madame. The lower halls and chambers of the great necropolis are not always in the same place at the same time. The lift went past another level. Aldrich stepped back as he saw skeletons in armor trudging sightlessly between rows of crypts. Their rotting clothing had the Watcher's stamp on it, some sort of undead guard. Powerful magic, madame. Oh, yes. Mina took out the rib bone, turning it over and over in her hands. Aldrich was fairly certain she was looking at something he couldn't see. The deeper we travel, the more pronounced the effect becomes. Mina snorted, a sound Aldrich hadn't expected from her. There is a reason even the most canniest of thieves have never pilfered past the lift jolted, stopped. A voice shrieked up the shaft. Interlopers, mouldering busybodies, wretch, gall-filled vermin. Mina sighed. Lord Khan, I presume. You'll chain me back up in that box before my honor is restored. Your body and spirit are at odds, Mina said pleasantly, as if they were speaking in the market. I've come to correct this. Bah! Aldrich looked around, attempting to pinpoint where Khan's voice was coming from. He was perturbed to realize it was echoing from inside his own head. Lord Khan seems more, how's he talking, madame? Aldrich whispered. He's had time to reconstitute himself, Mina replied. I suspect a spirit of pride moved his lips. No! The force of it rocked the lift. I am myself. I am Penric Khan, Death of Dragons, favored of the kings of Navarra. The spirit's voice reached a fever peak. Join the dead you hold so dear, and leave me to my work. Something rattled the top of the cage, and made a sharp, chiming snap. Then the lift fell. Guardsman! Mina grabbed Aldrich again. There was a sickening whip, 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 as entrances flashed past the lift's doors too fast to see. Aldrich looked at her in terror, but through the screaming plummet Mina's eyes were fastened on the squares of light. Corpse glow flickered. Hold fast. Aldrich's neck prickled, and there was a wrench. Aldrich hit stone. The Morn Watcher slid to a stop beside him. This was a vaulted corridor. Fine marbled finish by sand polish, his mind chattered, and there's a bronze trim on those sconces of green fire. A few lengths away was the lift shaft. Broken chains whipped past, followed by nothing. Then a distant crashing boom. Dust billowed out, coating them both. Mina coughed into a handkerchief. Aldrich pulled himself up, saw he was braced on a tomb, and almost fell again, letting go. As the dust settled, Mina wiped her face, tucked away the handkerchief, and turned to face Aldrich. Guardsman, I fear we face a slight delay. That sleight of hand she'd used in the lift, Mina explained, could only whisk people about a step or two. She had no spell that would magic them above ground. They would have to return the long way. After, and she emphasized this, they dealt with Lord Khan. Where is he now? Aldrich asked. Was that him inside the lift? Khan cast forth a shadow. Pride has the power to make itself known where it is unwanted. And I am sure it is a spirit of pride that has possessed of Lord Khan's remains. Seems so, madame. Aldrich looked around, still dazed. The delayed fright warred with a fascination of the stateliness of his surroundings. The place was beyond antique. He peered up at the corners carved with skulls merrily staring back down. The grainy stone looked as if it was at least from the Tower age. Did the Grand Necropolis go back that far? Aldrich considered it. Then another thought intruded. Lord Khan, madame, he's tried to kill me twice. Unfortunate, Mina agreed. Do you know where we are? Yes, she replied, then added, approximately. A wind suddenly whipped through the corridor, rattling dried flowers tied in sheaths to the crypts. Madame, I hear it. Stay by me. Be still. The sconce's fires dimmed. Aldrich backed into Mina, who'd gone still herself. Voices leaked through the air, which seemed to darken in a fashion unrelated to the light. The sounds grew louder, witless gibbering that sounded like words but slipped away just before being understood. It came from all around, as if they were in a crowd, and underneath the mutters Aldrich heard something more, a predatory droning, clawing nearer. Eventually, it faded. A frown pinched Mina's face, and her voice was soft. "We are lower in the necropolis than is wise. Cleave to me, for both of our sakes." Then she held out her hand. "I can't. I wouldn't presume," Aldrich babbled, horribly ashamed for some reason. "The presumption is mine." Mina looked down the passage. "If you're in contact with me, you may see things more clearly, until we reach the upper levels." Aldrich took her hand. He was wearing his gauntlets, but warmth spread up his arm. What sorts of magics the Morn Watchers had at their disposal, he didn't know, but the air seemed to steady. The corridor led into a tall room with pillars repeating in long lines like an arcade. To Aldrich's astonishment, streams of black water gurgled through the chamber, via channels cut into the rock. "It's like the Gardens of Ith in Starkhaven," he blurted. Mina stepped over a stream. "A visiting architect must have been inspired." Aldrich watched the streams ripple. They braided together at the end of the room, feeding into a carved gap in the wall, then sounded as if they turned into a waterfall. "A duke had the gardens built over the resting place of his lover's ashes 300 years ago. You are one for trivia. Emmerich would be delighted." "Madame?" Aldrich ventured. "What's Lord Khan's mission? What does he want?"
"Khan's temerarious flight has something to do with honor, supposedly,"
Mina said as they picked their way across the narrow channels.
"Nobility intrigues never held any interest for me."
Something itched at the back of Aldrich's mind at that, but the thought was shattered by a loud splash behind them.
"Madame?"
"Hold." Something flopped out of one of the streams, inching forward. Pale blooms stretched and grasped the air. Fingers, Aldrich realized, connected fans of scrabbling arm bones, but the streams were too shallow to accommodate that bulk of arms and hooked fingers.
"Madame!"
"Behind me," Aldrich obeyed. Mina added, "Do not drop my hand." The thing kept oscillating out of the water, undulating up more and more fused bones, nightmare fronds of something that was never alive. Water poured off a tangle of ribs that crested up before them like a cobra's hood, crowned by a misshapen thing vaguely resembling a skull. It split open sideways, its gullet spiked all the way down its neck. Mina slapped it, whip fast, with an echoing crack. Her hand coruscated with emerald fire.
"We are permitted passage,"
she enunciated clearly.
"Leave."
The thing's neck curled in confused anger, away from the Morn Watcher's flames. It hissed like shifting sand. The spell, burning in Mina's hand, coiled into ropes, a lash or whip, strangling cords.
"I will not ask again."
The thing fluked back down into the murky waters. Aldrich realized he had been squeezing the Watcher's other hand far too tight, and relaxed his grip. "Thank you." Mina turned, and only then did she shake her hand free with a wince.
"What bones? Like iron?"
"Madame?" Aldrich whispered. "What was that thing?"
"Uncatalogued,"
Mina said briskly.
"Emmerich will be thrilled to hear of it. Let us depart quickly. Aldrich's next few hours were a series of wonders and horrors, a grand delirium like those nightmares of his childhood. He stood with awe in the arena-sized tomb of a warrior queen, carved with a riot of battles and feasts that cavorted on the stone. He shivered at the majesty of the flowering gates, closing off a silent, enormous silver grave. He crossed a bridge made of giant's bones, over a pit of skeletons of a sort he did not recognize. He hid from a wheezing thing that doused all the light around it, but left behind a lingering grey shadows when it was gone. Just once, Aldrich had let go of Miner's hand, when a spectre rushed him. Everything had suddenly been much darker and disorientating. The Morn Watcher had dispelled the spirit, while Aldrich clung to the sides of a grave. He'd felt as if the room were heaving. When she grabbed his elbow again, things snapped into focus. Not that Miner's presence made the architecture less baffling. Corridors sprouted where there should have been no room between the walls. Stairs brought them to a higher landing than the ones they'd started on. At one point, they'd make their way through a maze of mirrors with sliding panels that led to smaller and smaller box-like rooms until they had to crawl. All the time, he'd gripped the Watcher's glove, and all the time, his mind worried about Lord Khan. Has Khan found what he wanted yet, madame? He may be occupied, Miner said, as they travelled a gently sloping path past Tableau of the Dead. The carefully preserved corpses had been posed as they'd been in life, reenacting their daily rituals. Some even moved, albeit slowly. It's no easier for the dead to pass through some of these places than the living. Lord Khan must want this matter of honour settled very badly. Undoubtedly, Miner replied. Have no fear. We draw closer to the upper levels. Aldrich felt it, a lightening in the air. The twists and turns of the passages were just as numerous, but the chambers were quieter. They even passed a few docile undead shuffling past harmlessly. After the exotic terrors below, Aldrich only felt mild aversion instead of his previously squirming fear. Miner stopped abruptly. That statue, she said. How would you describe it? Lapis lazuli, carved in the armor tournament or legion style, holding a scepter. Does it seem familiar? I've seen woodcuts of the style in books. Does it seem as if we've passed it before? Oh, 4 times now. Miner looked about as if the room would spit up answers. Something has foiled our direction. A voice spoke out. Aldrich had last heard it in the cage of the lift. Vanity, Watcher. To think you could stop the pride of his house. The Watcher sniffed. Her hand went to the velvet purse and the rib bone. These games diminish us all, your lordship. You will have nothing of me. Khan's voice seemed deeper, more resonant, Aldrich noticed. Was that how demonic spirits sounded? Once they settled in a body? I can feel you tugging with that little piece of rib and dragging that wretched thing behind you. Aldrich cleared his throat. I don't... We wish you no ill, Lord Khan. He was, in fact, imagining throttling what was left of the man's throat. Aldrich felt a sympathetic pain from the wound on his neck. The Morn Watch would gauge me. let me moulder on a shelf. Mina's lips became a thin frown as she looked around, as if searching for the disembodied voice beyond the walls. Lord Khan. Something smashed through the ceiling. Aldrich was nearly crushed as a golem of lashed-together bones hit the floor with a crack. It thudded toward them, effortlessly shoving aside the broken stone. Aldrich heard Lord Khan's voice sneer, I go to make my challenge, Watcher. Just before the golem's long bone clave whistled down. Aldrich and Mina dived in different directions. The golem swept the clave back at head height. Aldrich was saved by ducking behind a fallen chunk of stone. He scrambled farther as the golem advanced. Mina started to dash to where he was. Guardsman! As in the lift, come to... The golem slammed the clave into the ceiling. Mina barely tumbled clear of a slab of stone the size of a horse. The pouch containing the rib bone slipped from her hand, and the golem blade scythed down. There was a crunch. Mina winced, but kept moving even as the glaive spun. There was a ring of metal on metal as it hit Aldrich's spear. Guardsman! Aldrich barely deflected the golem's next sweep. The creaking monster had the strength of a rock slide. He feinted to the side. A second set of arms unfolded from the golem's chest, clutching knives. Aldrich parried the first, dodged the second. The main clave swung back like a pendulum. Warm dizziness, a rush of cool stone. Aldrich gasped. There was a room of smooth, dark green walls and tiny candles cupped in yellow glass. He could hear the golem stomping somewhere above them, claves scraping the floor. A bone form in a deep shelf of the room stood at the sound. It looked at them reproachfully, then rolled back to its rest. The guardsman pushed himself up with a scrape. "Thank you, madame," he said. There was something subtly wrong about the depth of this place. Floor length, salt glass mirrors fixed in the green. See how the candles look like hovering stars. Mina shook her head, brushing off her dress. Your endangerment is directly related to my folly. No, you came for me, madame. As I should. The sound of the golem faded. Either it had stopped or wandered away. Aldrich patted himself down. Would have been easier to leave me. So thank you. Again. His hand jutted against something cold. Guardsman? Sorry. Something's... I don't know what. Guardsman. Mina sounded regretful. Aldrich felt a sudden, inexplicable pang. I'm afraid this must be now. What must? Aldrich heard a strain in his voice. What now? Look down. I don't know what you... Look down. Aldrich looked. The broken blade of the glaive was lodged straight through his dry, unbloodied, unbreathing chest. Oh. The Chantry sisters that had schooled Aldrich was also Navaran. The nation's orthodoxy accepted that the Grand Necropolis was a fitting resting place for the bodies of all good souls destined to sit by the side of the Maker. The metaphysics of what would happen to his flesh, however, had been hand-waved. The spirit that would be placed there was not their providence, the sisters said. The city's necromancers would tend to that after his final hour came. Aldrich felt somehow cheated he was still conscious after it had happened. When? He demanded. How long have I been... Has this... Guardsman Aldrich Fenhausen died of his wounds after Lord Khan's funeral. Miner sounded apologetic. His body arose the next morning and went to his old post. Your captain was at a loss. As you were intestate, she sent you to us to ease your passing. I'm not dead, Aldrich said as he grabbed at the blade in his chest. I'm myself. I'm not a spirit. I'm me! Aldrich staggered as the blade came out with a sickening crunch. Flakes of, oh, maker, dried blood came out with it. You are not quite what you were, if that is who you still aim to be. Please, stop talking like that. Aldrich trembled. How could the dead... No, not yet. Tremble. Have you noticed your thoughts growing circular? Tell me about your life outside your love of art, Aldrich. Expound on any other topic. I think just fine. His own hands. If he took off a gauntlet, what would he see? I'm Aldrich Fenhausen, not some spirit going, using his body for a stroll. What have you thought since we embarked? Miner asked patiently. What's impressed itself? The style of the place, the buildings, the frescoes, the statues, and Khan. Always back to Khan. Many things, he said weakly. Miner looked sliced clean through him. The truth, Guardsman Aldrich. He loved his books. He'd never had any pretensions to being a scholar. He simply wanted to collect and read for its own sake. After work, after a few drinks with the other guards, he'd slip away shyly to his apartment and read by lamplight and fire. He'd loved the comfortable silence of those nights, loved them more than anything else. Aldrich lurched over to a mirror. A hollow face sagged back at him. He groaned, and the sound, he now realized, was of a peace with the dead around him. His vision grew dim with a dry, throat-closing anger. This had been his life, and there had been so little of it. Khan, that demon, whatever that thing was, had ended it without a thought. Aldrich wanted to rend the man limb from crackling limb, imagined raking his hands across that face, tearing everything and anything at all. A glove clamped his shoulder. He felt the warmth of a living hand. You will not lose yourself. The voice was stern, a warning shackled. I forbid it. You are suited for better things than rage. For a moment, Aldrich saw his body, Miner, and the green stonework from above, as if he hovered at length outside them all. Then more of himself slid back into place. His sight grew clearer. You brought me here to watch me, he said, quietly bitter. The Moon Watch assists both the dead and the living. We wish to help you resolve what you are. What's that? Driven. Miner squeezed his shoulder more consolingly, then stepped away. An entity as complete as you are is rare. Some of my colleagues argue the higher dead, such as yourself, do, in fact, hold fast to their mortal souls. Others attest that this is impossible. They would say that you are caught between two spirits, anger and curiosity. Whatever the case, you are unbalanced. Confronting Khan with you was my remedy. Aldrich let the clay fall with a clatter. There was another groan from the nook in the wall. but Khan's golem crushed the talisman. Mina looked up, as if replaying the scene. I cannot find him easily now. He mentioned honor, Aldrich said. It felt easier to think, strangely, now that he realized the body, my body, wasn't receiving leftover ideas about needing to breathe. The dizziness that had to come on him was gone. He also said something about a challenge. It could be anything. A spirit of pride would fasten onto something crucial to Lord Khan's dignity. So, you don't think he's gone to the winged halls to finish his duel with the man who killed him? Duke Janice, Aldrich asked. Mina slowly closed her eyes. It seems likely to me, madame. It was a moment before she spoke. You will excuse me. I am cataloguing all the ways I have been a fool. Aldrich considered that. I don't think so, madame. I mean, I'd still like to find Lord Khan. He picked up his spear, dented but miraculously unbroken. I won't. Don't know if I can stop myself from trying to fight him. I'll try. Good. Mina sent a mote of light into the nook of the wall. A moment later, a skeleton fell out, hissing and snapping. Mina snagged it with a collar of green fire, tugged it like a leash. Does that hurt? Aldrich asked, more sympathetic to the shambling thing than he had been a minute ago. The sensations differ. With some of the dead, one must exert direct control. The skeleton subsided, making a strange whine. A message, the Morn Watcher told it. Find Professor Emmerich Vokarin. Tell him, after some last-minute business in the winged halls, we'll be joining him above without delay. A large figure in golden armor hacked the last lock off an enormous mausoleum gate. It held out a hand, and the doors burst inward. The Van Markham tombs were spacious as mansions, ceilings carved with knights fighting dragons, rivers of wine poured from goblets, all circling a skull over a throne. The horror shuffled to the first tomb, the most recently deceased of the line. It placed a proprietary hand upon the lid. The triumphs of the flower of Navaran chivalry in stone. Khan whirled, eyes bleeding a purple light so deep it almost pulsed black. Aldrich gaped at the ceiling and rasped. Commissioned by King Caspar himself. I've only seen plates. You preposterous nuisance! Khan stormed out, and swayed when he saw the Morn Watcher standing quietly beside the door. Desecrating one's own grave is one thing, Lord Khan. Defiling another is vulgar. Janus Van Markham owes me a duel. A pantomime. You will only wake more of the dead. Mina looked at the hacked-off locks with distaste. I cannot let you draw more spirits here. Let them witness. Khan's shadow began to expand, a hulking shape at odds with the human frame holding a sword. The mark of the Pride Demon, Aldrich realized. Khan continued. The living that slighted me above are next, once Janus relearns his place. He's dead, Aldrich shouted, his words echoing around the chamber. Why could you care? You already killed each other. Khan brought his gaze back to the guardsman. The imprint of a larger presence swirled around the undead lord like an invisible storm of ash. What would you know of the price of higher stations? Aldrich felt his rage rush back at once. Whatever he was, dead man or imitation of a dead man, he knew what following it would mean. Survival, fury, perhaps oblivion when Minor put him down. Internment in this city of dead. But see how the vines of that ceiling curve around to turn into flowers. You slew me at your funeral. Aldrich hefted his spear. You owe me a duel first, Lord Khan. Only one of noble blood has killed today, Minor said, equidistant from both men. Perhaps Lord Khan fears to fight. Khan was quiet for a heartbeat, then brought up his shield. Never! Khan was suddenly on Aldrich, slashing. Aldrich got what he knew was a lucky jab with his spear. It scraped off Khan's breastplate. The Revenant wasn't as strong as the Golem, but Khan was quick, applying the blade with neat, efficient strokes. Guardsman! Stay back, Watcher, Khan spat. We duel as gentlemen, alone, with the weapons at hand. It'll be fine, Aldrich gurgled. He was dimly aware his body wasn't tiring like a mortal man's, but it seemed absurdly unfair he could still feel so much fear. Khan feinted a sweep into a strike, and his sword punctured Aldrich's lung, a fatal blow if he had been breathing. Aldrich pushed back, slamming his crossguard into Khan's helmet. Parted, the nobleman circled him, idly spinning his sword into a new stance. The match was his with time. I heard your babbling whenever you and the Watcher used that bone to look for me, Khan spat. A sad, sad thing. A spirit clinging to the dying curiosity of a man with a mania for baubles. You will die and fade in the marble halls of your betters from every single age. Chalcedony, not marble, Aldrich said automatically. Used in funerary buildings since the reign of Queen Verland. Would you keep quiet about that for one solitary... Aldrich's spear shot through Khan's throat, nearly beheading him. Khan shrieked and flung out a hand. An inferno of light blasted Aldrich across the room. You cur! You impotent worm! Magic dripped from Khan's fingers. The Watchers will find nothing of you but ash. A lasso of emerald fire whirled neatly around Khan's neck. Using magic breaks your own rules, Lord Khan. Minor pulled with one arm. Khan fell back, clawing at his ruined throat. Your duel is forfeit. You cannot... Khan buckled and strained against the rope. Aldrich saw gargantuan shadows twist around Khan, casting the chamber in flickering, thrashing light. The nobleman raised a clawed hand and the rope started to fray, until Aldrich slashed the hand with his spear. Khan howled, and the rope reformed, tightening further. I can, Minor said, nodding at Aldrich. Minor drew Khan in, and Aldrich harried him, jabbing and slashing before the nobleman could break the rope of fire. A gale rose. The force of the demon inside Khan crackled and flexed against the stone. Minor calmly continued to pull, looking as if she was exerting no more effort than dragging a small but willful dog. Finally, she had Khan near enough to touch, his flesh smouldering around the rope. I did not permit you to duel Aldrich for your own satisfaction, Lord Khan, the Morn Watcher declared. What then? I allowed him, Mina said sweetly, to see that pride is a cheat. Mina yanked hard. Khan screamed, suddenly stopped. Aldrich staggered up to Mina right as the gaping skull, helmet and all, rolled to his feet. The jittering shadows settled. The invisible presence that had filled Khan seeped away. The guardsman picked up the silent skull. What familiar teeth? And Aldrich placed it on Khan's fallen body, feeling nothing but sad relief. Excellent. Mina tucked a stray hair back into place. The crypt is calm already. What now, madame? You heard my message to Emmerich? She crooked a finger, gestured to Aldrich. Will be expected. It won't be difficult to return from here. Aldrich looked around. I'm allowed to come back with you? Of course. Mina lifted her skirts and stepped over a chunk of stone from the fight. Emmerich will be put out if we don't both show up for tea. They were back in Emmerich's den. Aldrich had been astonished to see familiar tomes in a neat stack on the necromancer's desk. Those? Yours, yes. From your home. Emmerich shook his head. Forgive the liberty, guardsman. After you and Mina left for the necropolis, I had to search for a reason you might have returned so unexpectedly. I believe we found it, Mina said, from where she was overseeing Emmerich's manservant transferring the contents of a bubbling beaker into a bowl. Emmerich handed the top book to Aldrich. It was a gazetteer of Navarra City, stamped with a crowned skull surrounded by flowers. Aldrich flipped it open and read the blocky inscription. To our son with love. May you be blessed in your studies with the chantry. All this effort for me? I'm just a guardsman, sir. I am. Was? Aldrich pushed doubt aside, and he held the gazetteer to his chest. He existed, knew what he loved, and that he had been loved, and that somehow seemed enough in the moment. The great leveller has no favourites, Emmerich smiled. Neither does the Morn Watch. You are faced with a choice, Mina said, coming over. You have confronted your killer, and recognize your driving passion. You may rest now, guardsman. Or you may work under the auspice of a watcher, Mina said. Under a modicum of magical control. To avoid ennui, the bond must be given freely. To you, madame, if it is satisfactory. The guardsman ducked his head, and because that felt inadequate, knelt on a knee and held out a hand. Mina, smiling slightly, took it. Emmerich coughed, looking away. Please, let the poor fellow up. What position were you thinking? I thought it was obvious. Aldrich felt a slow excitement as he heard Mina say, We have a great need for someone to take charge of the library.